Hi, everybody. So here we are again, thinking a little bit more about some of the things that might unfold in this coming Mars retrograde. So today I'm going to try my best to get some sense of Mars's relationship to the Sun. And in particular, I think this is important because Mars's retrograde always occurs around the time that Mars moves to have its opposition with the Sun, and also this moment where Mars will eventually take the night stage, if you will, as this Red Lord of the night throughout the entire night. It's almost like we could think of it as the full moon of Mars occurs during the Mars's retrograde. And there's a couple things that I want us to know about this. But to start with, in the month of October, the light of Mars is going to grow so bright that it'll be even brighter than Jupiter, which is usually the second brightest planet to Venus. And the brightness is going to peak around the 13th of October when Mars reaches its opposition to the Sun. But also in the earlier part of that month of October, Mars is going to get closer to the Earth than it will be for the rest of the 2020s, and I don't think it gets any closer again until 2035. And this is not uncommon during certain retrogrades, especially with the outer planets, that they come closer to Earth and they get much brighter during their retrograde periods. So what we want to do is get a sense of this and what this might mean for the retrograde, and some of the things that we might be able to start to begin to understand about what is to come. So what I'm going to do, let's share the screen over here. Okay, so what we have, if we look at now, first thing I want us to understand is that when a planet goes retrograde, we really need to think about in the area of the zodiac that is covered. So Mars' retrograde is about from 15 degrees to about 28 degrees of Aries. And what we need to know about this is that Mars has already covered this zodiacal territory once. And when Mars turns around, Mars will and stations retrograde, Mars will begin to move backwards in the zodiac. So if we move it forward a bit, what we can start to see, we see Mars moving backwards through the zodiac and covering that territory again. So this will be a second pass along this entire area that Mars has covered. Similarly, if we were to keep going forward in time, we see that once Mars stations direct, it's going to move all the way back over that territory again until finally it passes beyond the area of the zodiac where it's stationed retrograde. So this is why what this gives us is a strong emphasis of it gives us a strong emphasis of this area of the chart throughout the retrograde, and also kind of will help us to understand why certain people will experience the retrograde in more intense ways, and help us to understand why certain areas of our life are emphasized during the retrograde as opposed to others. So immediately what we're interested in is for the poor individuals who happen to have points and planets that are in the latter half of the cardinal signs. So that being Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. Because this Mars is definitely pinging those places, so it may activate, and it may activate martial themes within that person's life, within those areas of their life. But similarly, the thing that a lot of us have been looking at, why astrologers have been so concerned with this coming period of time, is because of the dynamic that is happening between Mars and Saturn. And what you'll notice is that Mars and Saturn are both in cardinal signs, and they are creating a very tight square with one another. So they've already passed and had the first series of 3 squares that they will have during this time. But even if it's not exact by degree, it is still operative by sign during the entirety of the retrograde. So this dynamic, what's interesting to me too, is that Mars rules, or Mars is more associated, let's put it that way, with the square aspect. And it's because it is a confrontational aspect. It is about, it is an assertive aspect. It is very direct, and it brings up potential conflict between different forms. And what I would say here is we have both the malefics. We have Saturn, the greater malefic, and we have Mars, the lesser malefic, in this maybe at loggerheads with one another at this moment. And because of this, Saturn, especially Saturn in Capricorn, represents maybe in some ways like the rock, if you will. And Mars represents this strong fiery force that is trying to resist the boundary that this rock is maintaining. And one thing I brought up in some of the things I've written about it is that, there is this sense of the principle of overcoming, which is something that a lot of astrologers will talk about. But what we can see here, if I move the chart back a little bit, is that obviously because of their position, Saturn rises much earlier in time than Mars. And so because of that, we can almost think that Saturn has like the upper hand on Mars because it's been doing what it does for throughout much of the day, much longer than Mars has. So when Mars was still not visible in the sky, Saturn becomes visible and begins to exert Saturn's influence. And then later Mars rises, and it's kind of, and we could think of it as is that if somebody had gotten up earlier in the day, they have a head start, if you will, at the activities that are going on. But I think that what's important and what I'm going to try to bring out in the course is that it doesn't really matter to me who out of the two of them really win. And the reason I say that is because Mars is still going to do Mars. That's not going to stop. And this is why I think that it's so important during the retrograde to pay attention to the events that unfold in our lives, especially in the last several weeks in the lead up to the retrograde, because we will have already gotten an experience of that Mars-Saturn square perfecting. And as we move through the retrogrades are very conducive to reworking a planetary's power and signification within our chart. And I think that the Martial is one of that the expression that Mars represent is often very misunderstood and often neglected, and is done so for sometimes legitimate and good reasons, because we're not wanting to mess with this force because we know that we can get burned by it. But oftentimes, because we don't approach it with as much consciousness and action as we might approach some of the other planetary powers, it goes underdeveloped. It also ends up laying fallow and wastes itself, and similarly it comes out in unnatural and unuseful ways. So this is something I want us to consider. But today, in this video, what I'm trying to help us understand is what's going on. So if you had planets and placements that were in the other cardinal signs, or any of the cardinal signs, especially the latter half of the cardinal signs, they would be more heavily activated by this Mars retrograde. So the first thing I would do is encourage you to look at your chart and try to look at what area of your chart is in the direct difficult aspect that Mars is making, in particular opposition and squares. And we're going to spend some more time looking at this feature, but I also want to turn to something that is happening as we move further into September, which is that Mars is going to make an opposition to the Sun. And what we can see, if I move it forward just a bit more, what we see is, again, around the 13th or 14th of October, Mars will be in an opposition to the Sun. And what this is going to mean is that Mars is going to rise right as the sun sets. So we'll notice that we back it up. Here we have the sun has just set below, or is about to set below the descendant, and Mars is rising up above the horizon. And from this point on, and it lasts for quite a while, I don't have the date in front of me, Mars will be increasingly redder and brighter in the sky. And this is why, rather than view in Vedic astrology, rather than viewing the retrograde as a weakness for the outer planets, it's often viewed as a strengthening of the outer planets. I think that's something to keep in mind as we move forward, because they are closer, they are brighter, and I think that the observational aspect is very important. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, Mars is already very visible in the night sky, and so is Saturn and Jupiter. So what I would do is find out when Mars is rising within your location. I may send some resources out or attach something below this video to help you find that information in your location. But I think observational astronomy is really important when it comes to getting a sense of the dynamics that the planets have. And I think that it's also an invitation to sort of engage visually with this appearance of Mars in the night sky. And yeah, so I'd encourage you to go out and get a glimpse of Mars and see how it speaks to you. You know, see what comes to you when you see this very bright red planet in the night sky. Another feature that is interesting to think about in regards to Mars' solar phase as it moves closer to the opposition with the Sun is that while Mars has been going retrograde, Mars will have slowed down to a standstill and then be quite slow while it is in its retrograde movement. But when it reaches this phase where it is in its opposition to the Sun, it suddenly begins to speed up and then slow down again. And this can also help us understand that at this moment there may be some action in which Mars is trying to express some sort of energy or movement in Mars's expression that is then kept at bay because Mars slows down. Another feature that's interesting within the achronal phase of a planet, and particularly with Mars, is that Mars eventually reaches this position where it's in something that's called curtailed passage. And this is when the planet is not visible and rising over the eastern horizon after the sun sets, or goes no longer visible on the western horizon as dawn approaches. So there's this period of time where Mars will not make contact with the horizon. So again, we could kind of consider this being a way in which Mars is not able to ground its expression by bringing to completion something that's or initiating something as effectively that might be represented if Mars did make contact with the horizon during this phase. So again, what we have coming, from lots of different perspectives is there is both an emphasizing quality and a strengthening. Because Mars is slowing down, it begins to be emphasized in the sky during its station. Turning around, it then moves into the opposition with the Sun, which is where Mars will really begin to be this red lord of the night. Mars will move closer and brighter to the Earth than it will be for quite a while. So in summary, we have a lot of different factors that we're needing to account for and can help us understand why Mars may manifest in lots of different ways at this time. But this is just a couple insights that we get from the astrology as it's understood by different traditions, and also from the practical observational features that we see within astronomy. So I hope you've enjoyed this and speaks to you soon.